So it's always a nice feeling when someone or something surprises you and delivers results that exceed your expectations. That's what the 2024 Mazda CX-30 Carbon Turbo did for me. Now, the Carbon Turbo is a brand new trim level for the 2024 model year, and Mazda has given the CX-30 some nice upgrades. So I'll give you all the details and I'll share my thoughts on what this Carbon Turbo is all about. All right, so let's start it off with this trim, the Carbon Turbo. So the base price is $32,790, which is the most economical way you can get into a CX-30 with the more powerful turbocharged engine. And I'll talk engine details later here because I want to tell you about this paint color first. It's called Zircon Sand Metallic, and it's only available on the Carbon Turbo trim. It's actually quite an underrated color in my opinion, and looks better in person compared to the pictures online. Next, you've got 18-inch wheels in a black finish. I also like the cladding on the side. Part of me wishes they were painted in black to match the wheels and some of the other trim pieces around the car, but overall I think it looks pretty cool. Now let's move out to the back where the CX-30 has a dual exit exhaust pipe setup and some badging, but a simple and clean look out back. Now overall, the CX-30's design is nice, and compared to the competition from Hyundai, Kia, and the like, I much prefer the simple styling of the Mazda. And now on the interior, where there's another exclusive item for the Carbon Turbo trim, and it's these terracotta covered seats. So this is a brownish cinnamon type finish contrasted with a black sway-like material in the center. Good looking colors, adds a premium feel to the interior of the Carbon Turbo trim. Now, since we're talking about the seat, let's talk about the overall size and the comfort up front here. So sitting at 5'11", the seat is in its lowest position. I have some headroom on top of me. There is some additional legroom. I would imagine somebody a couple inches taller than I am will also fit in here just fine. In terms of the seat, so this is a electronically controlled seat for the driver, a manual seat for the passenger. I wish they were both electronic, but it is a heated seat and it's fairly comfortable. The one thing that I have to say could use some improvement maybe, or it's a little weird, is the frame of the seat, specifically in the thigh area. I feel like it's poking me, and it's not to say that it's an uncomfortable seat because it's nicely cushioned and good to sit in. It's just something I noticed. Now let's switch over into the quality and into the design. It's a very simple looking interior space, a couple knobs and switches for the climate controls, some physical buttons here in the center area to control things. Clean, simple, elegant, nice to use materials with stitching on the dash and on the doors, and paired with the seats gives it a premium feel, and overall it's just a nicely put together, kind of screwed together tight interior. Now let's switch over into the technology, where you do have a bigger 10.25-inch screen. It's nicely placed in this little compartment and not just stuck up on the dash where it's an eyesore. The software itself is simple and easy to use and to get used to. It does have the option to run Android Auto and Apple CarPlay wirelessly. Now, one thing to be clear about the touch capabilities of the screen. So if you're running Mazda's base out-of-the-box software, it's exclusively controlled using the controller knob down here by the transmission controller. If you run Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, then you have the ability to use either the controller unit or your finger. When you run Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, the touchscreen capabilities become enabled on this screen, but you can't use your finger if you're running Mazda's base software. All right, now let's cover the rear seats. So sitting behind myself at 5'11", I do have a couple inches of legroom. I also have an inch or two of headroom. Surprisingly, my hair is not touching the ceiling, and generally it does for most cars, but not in the CX-30. I'm able to sit upright, straight, actually quite comfortably. Now, in terms of width, this is a 2 adult size passenger rear seat area. 3 adults are probably gonna really squeeze in here and be very uncomfortable. I wouldn't recommend it. 2 children, 3 children are going to fit just fine. Now, speaking of children, I did borrow 2 child seats specifically for this review, one booster style seat and one forward or rear facing child seat, a traditional one. The booster seat will fit just fine. The child will be comfortable, plenty of legroom, even for somebody sitting behind me at 5'11". But the traditional seat, forward facing, where the legs are facing this way, and sitting behind me at 5'11", I would envision that the child is probably going to be kicking the back seats here, so maybe a little uncomfortable for the person sitting in the front. So you're probably going to have to forward or move the seat forward for the child in the forward-facing seat to have a little bit more legroom. Something to consider if you're thinking about buying this and you're a 3 or 4 person family. Now, speaking of children, again, even though this car is keyless entry for the front doors, the back doors are not keyless entry. Mazda, you got to make all 4 doors keyless entry, because I envisioned if you have your child with you, you're coming to the back seat, you don't want to take your key out of your pocket, you don't want to put your open the front doors first and then open the back doors. So again, that's something that should be updated. It should be keyless entry for all 4 doors. Now, to round it off, the overall comfort and the amenities back here, climate control vents, it is missing charging ports. Mazda put charging ports in the back of the CX-30, very important. Comfort, it's good, just as comfortable as the seats in the front, nicely cushioned. There is an armrest that is also nicely cushioned with cup holders. But in terms of the back seat, that's pretty much it. So let's talk trunk space before we go for a drive. This is a keyless entry tailgate, manual lift, but once you open it, you're greeted with 20 cubic feet of space. Now, I've left my small to medium sized camera bag here for reference, so I don't really envision anyone having any issues with storage or daily drivability putting your things back here. You can probably fit a child stroller. You can probably fit 2 or 3 larger pieces of luggage depending on how you rack and stack. And if you needed a little bit more space, you have the ability to fold down these rear seats. Both seats do fold down pretty flat, and you're expanded to 45 cubic feet of space in the back of your CX-30, so plenty of storage room if you fold down the rear seats to put larger pieces of stuff, for the lack of a better term. Now, in terms of closing it, there is a button here that locks all the doors for you, so you don't have to take a key out of your pocket. You close it, manual lift gate. So now let's go for a drive. All right, so now let's see what this thing feels like to drive. Foot on the brake, start, stop, fires up. And the shifter is a traditional mechanical shifter, so you have to pull it down physically into gear, not like some of the digital shifters you have now. But let me give you some numbers in terms of the engine. So this is a 2.5 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder that makes 250 horsepower and 320 pounds-feet of torque. Now, Mazda does say that in order to generate this power output, you have to use 93 octane. And if you use something less, such as like 87, it'll bump it down to 227 and 310. Now, it is connected to a 6-speed automatic transmission, and it puts power down via an all-wheel drive system. 0 to 60 occurs in 5.8 seconds. Gas mileage is 22 in the city, 30 on the highway, for a combined average of 25. So now I'm gonna do this driving portion in kind of 2 different aspects, sporty and normal daily driving. Let's start off with the sporty. Put it in manual shift. There are no paddle shifters, so you have to use the transmission gear selector. And this car does have a sport mode. No launch control. I'm just gonna go ahead and mash it. And it automatically shifts even though I'm in manual shift mode. It'll shift it at 5,500 RPM. It won't go all the way to the 6,000 plus red line that it has. Not sure why, but let's give it some more. And I'm not gonna go too crazy here, but just to give you a feel. The transmission shifts quick. It's a regular 6-speed automatic, nothing to go crazy over, but this does feel pretty zippy. It's an eager engine, I'll call it that. It does feel the 0 to 60 in 5.8 second range, but at the same time, it is quite surprising, and that's because a lot of the torque is down low. So I'm in first gear again. Let's mash it. Okay, so that went above. It went close to the 6,000. All right, so that was 60 miles an hour. So it's pretty quick. I mean, it's zippy is the best way I can describe it because of the torque down low. In the lower RPM range, it really surprises you when you kind of get up and go. But in the higher RPM range, it does kind of die off a little bit. But I do maintain that Mazda's philosophy is that they want a fun driving experience. They don't want this to feel like a slush box. And I feel like they've achieved that in the CX-30. This does feel engaging to drive for what it is, considering 250 horsepower and 320 pounds-feet of torque. It does feel eager to get up and move, so it is exciting. I'll put it to you that way in terms of sporty driving. Now let me switch over and talk about daily drivability, something that most people are just going to use this CX-30 in. And actually, let me take it off of sport mode because it's holding the gear. Now, in terms of daily drivability, this thing is tuned perfectly, and it's because of all of that torque down low. Now, I had a chance to drive this for a week, and I drove it in several different scenarios: city driving, highway driving. I even took it into the canyons for a little bit. And smooth roads, rough roads, it performs very nicely. Stop and go from a stop, merging onto a highway, passing, all of that down low torque works very, very nicely. And kudos to Mazda. You can really tell that they've tuned it for daily drivability, something that most people are going to use this for maybe 95, 96, 97% of the time. So great daily drivability from this motor. Now, in terms of the steering feedback and the steering feel, because this is one of the things you immediately jump into a car, you put your hands on the wheel. It's one of the first things that you do. And generally, when you get into a car and it's kind of slushy and the steering wheel is loose and jello-y, it doesn't really give you a good sensation of quality. At least for me, it doesn't. Now, I think Mazda has done it on purpose in that they've tuned this steering feedback to have a lot of weight and to kind of translate that into quality, because when you get into this car, the steering feedback is really nice, nicely weighted, gives a good sensation of quality, good dynamics, and just the overall feedback when you're driving sporty is also good. It doesn't feel like a slush box like I mentioned earlier. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is just the overall comfort and the suspension and how it feels. Again, I drove this on smooth roads, I drove it on rough roads, on the highway, and it's very, very compliant. Other than the weird feeling that I got in the thighs for the frame support, specifically of the seat is very cushiony, the suspension is compliant, and it soaks up the bumps really nicely. Excellent, excellent feeling in all daily driving scenarios, whether it be smooth roads, rough roads, highway, it does it all really nicely. So overall, this is a wonderful daily driver car that is fun and exciting, something that you may not be expecting in a car in this class or in this price range. And it also has great premium feel inside of the cabin. This is exactly what Mazda wants you to feel, and I think it really meets their overall philosophy and what they're trying to achieve in their cars now. So that's pretty much it. Now let's wrap it up with some final thoughts. So that's the Mazda CX-30 Carbon Turbo. This thing really exceeded my expectations in various different aspects, but mainly because of the way it drives and the way it feels. Is it perfect? No, I mentioned a couple things throughout this video that could be improved, and also understand that part of the reason why it's not perfect is probably because of the price tag. But hey, let me tell you something. This thing feels great. It does not feel like an economobile, and it punches above its weight class in terms of quality. So that's all I've got. If you've got any questions, please feel free to leave me a comment down below or send me a message on Instagram. Thank you to Mazda for giving me access to this car. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.